Good morning. Thank you very much for responding to my messages. I've watched your videos and really interested in them about the 1335 in Daniel chapter 12. I've got so much to share with you. You are right, there is two fulfillments, one in Jesus' day and one in our day. And I want to show you the start of the first fulfillment, as you've asked me. And I'm going to go through it to prove that it is the same as Daniel chapter 12. It's the book of Revelation. It starts in verse 10, but I'm not going to touch on chapter 10 or chapter 11. I'm going to touch on chapter 12, 13, and then just the beginning of 14. We've no need to look at Daniel chapter 12. We'll just refer to it because both of us know it extremely well. The start is September the 23rd, 2017. That is to be found in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, because this is what happened. When Jesus was born, there was a sign in heaven, a star that the wise men had to follow to give worship to Jesus and to give him the gifts. Herod tried to find out where he was so he could destroy him. Well, if you remember, he destroyed all the children just to get to the one. That's an important point because Babylon the Great is going to be destroyed to get to the seed, true Christians. All of it. Just like Herod did. Anyway, let's start. A sign in heaven. Verse 1, it says, "And a great sign was seen in heaven, a woman arrayed with the sun, and the moon was beneath her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. And she was pregnant, and she cried out in her pains and in her agony to give birth." So it's another birth. But if you look on YouTube, there's lots of brothers and sisters that know that the sign in heaven has occurred, just like the three wise men. Not everybody knew, just the three wise men. And some brothers and sisters are informed as well. And they've got channels like yours, and they're sharing their bit with us to help us. So look at that, because it's the sign in heaven, just like the star when Jesus was born. Right. There's another sign because the devil also plays a big role. And we're going to see both roles played out because this is a battle. The battle starts in heaven, but soon Satan is thrown down to the earth. I'm going to show you both sides because it's in this book. Okay, so we know that there's war in heaven as we go through chapter 12. We know that Satan has been hurled down to the earth. He's conquered the dragon. And it says, it talks about the 1,260 days here, and it talks about the 3.5 times, just like the book of Daniel does. But it says that in verse 17, "And the dragon grew wrathful at the woman and went off to wage war with the remaining ones of her seed, who observe the commandments of God and have the work of bearing witness to Jesus." This work the 1,260 days, as we'll see. One thing I want you to notice, it uses the word seed, the remaining ones of her seed. Now, if you remember the promise to Abraham, he said, I will multiply your seed as the sands of the sea. So we're drawing on that illustration. The book of Revelation is using it. And it's the next verse that is a real... It's been kept secret. Nobody's understood the next verse. It's not the part about the beast coming out of the sea or anything like that. It's the bit about and it in this Bible stood still upon the sands of the sea. Some Bibles render it he, or the dragon stood on the sands of the sea. But originally John wrote, I stood on the sands of the sea. Now the confusion arises because how could John be in heaven receiving this and yet standing on the sands of the sea or the beach? He couldn't. So who is stood there? He wrote, I stood. And it's under inspiration from Holy Spirit that he put that. I stood by the sands of the sea. And this is identical to Daniel chapter 1, verse 12. It's the angel that's telling him what to write. I stood by the sands of the sea, or the remaining ones of her seed that have been multiplied like the sands of the sea. So it's nothing to do with the literal sea or the sand. The beast with the 10 horns and the 10 crowns are from the restless sea of mankind. Let's press on. What happens is he goes off to wage this war on the seed, and he does what Herod did. He decides to kill all to get to the seed, as you'll see later on when he's destroying Babylon the Great, the 666. But for now, it says that it acts for 42 months. 42 months is 1,260 days. The same as the preaching work in Daniel chapter 12, the constant feature. Because if you remember, in verse 17, it says that the dragon grew wrathful at the woman and went off to wage war with the remaining ones of her seed who observed the commandments of God. And this is it, have the work of bearing witness to Jesus. The 1,260 days witnessing that's in Daniel is in Revelation chapter 11 and 10, but we're not touching on that today. So it's all to do with him not wanting this secret message out that me and you are coming to understand, and possibly many others. So it's acting for 42 months, but then something else happens. Because if you remember in Daniel, it says that there's 1,260 days, and then it says there's an extra 30. That brings us to 1,290 days. And then the disgusting thing that causes desolation comes out. It's in this book too. It speaks about In verse 11, that I saw another wild beast ascending out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like a lamb, but it began speaking as a dragon. And it makes the earth and those who dwell in it worship the first beast whose death stroke got healed. It performs great signs in the front of mankind. So it makes the earth and all those who dwell in it worship the first wild beast. So it's going to make everybody worship this beast, this disgusting thing that comes up in the image of the beast. Notice. And it misleads those who dwell on the earth because the signs that were granted it to perform in the sight of the wild beast, while it tells those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the wild beast. Well, we know that anybody who makes an image and worships an image or anything like that from the law is accursed. No, we don't want to become accursed. 15, and there was granted to it to breathe to the image, to give breath to the image of the wild beast, so that the image of the wild beast should both speak and cause to be killed all who would not in any way worship the image of the wild beast. We're made in God's image. We were clay when he first made us, lifeless. But he breathed into us the breath of life, and we are in the image of God. This image is in the image of Satan. And if you remember, Satan said that he could turn all away from God, that we only served him for what he gave us. Well, we don't, it's out of love. But Satan is going to offer the world so much through this image that he brings to life. And we've got to be very careful. "16, and it puts under compulsion all persons, the small, the great, the rich, the poor, and the free and slave, that they should give these a mark in their right hand or their forehead, and nobody might be able to buy or sell except a person having the mark, the name of the wild beast, or the number of its name." So we're going to be put under great compulsion. Now, do you remember, we can't buy or sell. There's nothing. We've got no... It's like being in a wilderness. We are... If you can't buy food, you're in a terrible state. If you can't buy anything or sell anything, you've got absolutely nothing. You are in a devastated place. Now, this is what Jesus went through for the 42 days. So remember, 1,260, the preaching work. Then this other beast comes up, just as Daniel said, 1,290, a 30-day setup period. And then Daniel said the disgusting thing that causes desolation. Well, we'll be in a desolate place when we can't buy or sell. He's going to force all to receive the mark of the beast. Well, we don't want that mark. We want the mark of God and his son Jesus Christ, as we'll go on to a little bit later. Jesus went through this for the 42 days because the devil, upon him being baptized, he went into the wilderness. One day into the wilderness, being prepared, 40 days and 40 nights being tempted. He couldn't buy food. He had nowhere to live. And yet the devil offered him so much. He offered him, change these stones into loaves of bread. He could have had as much food as he wanted, but he said no. He could have had all the kingdoms of the world, but Jesus said no. Thank you to Jesus Christ. He saved us. He resisted being put under all this pressure to break his integrity to God. And we're going to suffer the same. But he's alerted us, so we know what to do. And that's what the preaching work is, to get this message out to all Christians, because they need to know they can't receive this mark. Because Babylon the Great, where true Christians are, do you remember in verse, is it 4 or 5? Get out of her, my people, if you don't want to receive in her sins. So God's people are in there, almost invisible. And if you remember, Jesus said to the disciples in Matthew chapter 13, when he gave the illustration of sowing the wheat in the field, he said somebody came along and sowed weeds, the devil. But he said, don't worry. When the disciples asked, shall we go out and collect the weeds? He said, no, because you'll uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the conclusion. And I'll send out my angels, collect the weeds together and burn them in the fire. Then the wheat would be clearly defined, because they have not accepted the mark of the beast. The weeds are going to be burned with the fire, just like Babylon the Great, because they've accepted the mark of the beast, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Now this, I'm going to miss one verse out, because we're going to talk about that. That's the 666. And if we manage to get through this period of time, so we've got the 1,260, the 30-day setup, which brings us to 1,290. I'm quoting Daniel here. Then we've got the missing period, because it doesn't give you any more in Daniel, because it's a secret. But Jesus fulfilled it. If you go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, he said in the Sermon on the Mount, I came to fulfill the law and the prophets. And this prophet, Daniel, has to be fulfilled. So when he got baptized at 30, he spent 1 day entering the wilderness, 40 days being tempted by the devil, 1 day out of the wilderness and being ministered to by the angels. Then he started his ministry, which is 1,260. After all that, that came to 1,332, which is an important number. Then he's killed and he's in the grave for 3.5 days. After the 3.5 days, he comes back to life and stands up for his allotted reward. That is 1,335. With him being 30 years old to start it. The 30 is a day for a year. But I know that you differ with me on this, and that's not important. Don't worry, I'm not worried about it. What is important is that we understand what's happening in our day, so that we can help people to avoid this mark. Now, if you remember in Daniel, verse 13 of Daniel chapter 12, he said to Daniel, after he missed out everything because of the secret, that is the 42 days of temptation by the disgusting thing that causes desolation, and the death and 3 days in the grave. He missed that out as it was a secret. And the other chapters touch on this, 10 and 11, and help us to understand that secret, but it's too much for today. He said at the end of that verse, Daniel, I'm going to read it because I think this one's important. In verse 12, it says, happy is the one who keeps in expectation and who arrives at the 1,335 days. But as for you yourself, this is Daniel, go toward the end. That is the end of his life. He's already an old man. You will rest in death. And he has been for thousands of years. But you will stand up for your lot at the end of the days, or is allotted reward at the end of the days. When he's speaking about at the end of the days, it's not the end of time. It's the end of the 1,335 days, because after that, we're taken to heaven. And that's what I wanted to point out in the book of Revelation. There shouldn't be the big 14. It should carry on smoothly. So read it as though it's not split into chapters. So we've gone right through in Revelation, the 1,260. We see this beast bringing about the image of the beast, 30 days to set it up as according to the prophecy in Daniel. And then it puts everybody under, Jesus described it as the disgusting thing that causes desolation, because true Christians just can't accept the mark. And so for them, it is a desolation. It's like being in the desert with nothing, can't buy or sell. That's 42 days. And then they're killed. But after 3 days, or 3.5 days, verse 1 of 14, and I saw and looked the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. After this 1,335, these are standing up for their allotted reward. Just like the promise to Daniel, if you were happy are those who keep in expectation and wait until the end of the 1,335 days. And Daniel, when it happens, is one of these, standing on Mount Zion for his allotted reward. Just as he was promised, you'll stand up for your lot at the end of the 1,335 days. My brother, if we keep our integrity, we'll be stood there too. I hope to see you in heaven, because we're living in this time right now. Now I want to go back to the 666, because there's two sides in a battle. There's Michael and there's the dragon, which is Satan the devil. Now, it says here is where wisdom comes in, or insight. Let the one who has intelligence calculate the number of the wild beast, for it is a man's number, and its number is 666. Insight. And the insight is the understanding of Daniel chapter 12. Because you can't calculate this until you understand the 1,335 days. I could go into real detail on this, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to show you how to calculate it. Right, the devil is to rise up against the seed. And in verse 11, chapter 11, it says it conquers and kills them. They lay dead in the wilderness for 3 days. I hope that you read all that, because it's the same account as this. It starts with the preaching work and goes on. But he's got his job to do, just like Herod. He's trying to destroy all of God's people which are hidden in amongst the weeds. Now, verse 17, if you remember chapter 13, verse 1, it spoke about, let me just read it. And I saw a wild beast ascending out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, and upon its horns 10 diadems, and blasphemous names. Right, so there's 10 horns, and they've got crowns or diadems on that is raised up out of the sea. And this is what they are. 17, chapter 17, verse 12, and the 10 horns that you saw mean 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they do receive authority as kings for 1 hour with the wild beast. And then the rest of this chapter talks about how they go against God's people, the seed. Abraham's promise, I'll multiply your seed as the sands of the sea. And this is how he does it. It goes into 18 and it talks about Babylon the Great. That is all Christianity. The weeds and the wheat. And verse 4 says that I heard another voice out of heaven say, get out of her, my people, if you do not want to share with her in her sins or part of her plagues. So God's people are in there, no matter what denomination, no matter what religion. They're all trying to worship God, and there's weeds and wheat mixed up. But this time, we've got to get out and identify ourselves by not receiving this mark. Now, this is what the devil does. Render to her, even as she herself rendered. Do to her twice as much. Yes, twice the number of the things she did in the cup in which she puts a mixture. Put twice as much of the mixture for her. So these 10 kings and the wild beast were destroying Babylon the Great, just like Herod destroyed all the babies to get to the seed Jesus Christ. He's destroying all Babylon the Great to get to the seeds, the remaining ones that he talked about in Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, so that he can wipe everybody out, make them all accept the mark of the beast. Just like he said he could in the beginning of Genesis. He could turn everybody from God. So twice as much. Now, if me and you had work and, let's say it's to build a house, and a house took 6 months, and the owner came along and said, I want 2 houses. It's only just to give us double the amount of time. So the devil has got 666 days. Don't forget, we have to calculate it. It is a secret, just like Daniel chapter 12. And we can't understand it. Let the one who has insight calculate it. The insight is the 1,335 days that are in Daniel. 666 twice is 1,332. Then he feels as though he has accomplished his purpose, because Babylon the Great has been completely burned with fire. I'm going to find that scripture. And cried out as they look at the smoke from the burning of her, and said, what city is like the great city? So she's completely burned with fire, just like Jesus said the weeds would be burnt with fire. And he feels as though all are now worshipping the image of the beast. But if you go to chapter 11, it explains a wonderful thing. They're dead in the streets for 3 days. After 3 days, God brings them back to life. In fact, I will show you just a little bit of it. 11. After 3 days, Spirit of life from God enters into them, and they stand on their feet, and great fear fell upon those beholding them. And they heard a loud voice out of heaven say to them, come on up here. And they went up into heaven in the clouds, and their enemies beheld them. So they got to the end of the 1,335 days, and they got the invitation to come on up to heaven, just like Daniel chapter 12 verse 13, to stand for their allotted reward on Mount Zion, along with Jesus Christ. So the 666 doubled, 1,332, the same length of time Jesus was alive. Jesus died, was in the grave 3.5 days, died, and then was raised up. 1,335. 666 twice, 1,332, which within that is the preaching work, 1,260, the 30-day setup period according to Daniel chapter 12 of the disgusting thing that causes desolation, the length of time that Jesus was in the wilderness being tempted by the devil in that desolate place, and the preaching work. They all calculate before the death to 1,332, the same as the 666, twice, because he has to do twice as much work. And then we've got the resurrection, and then everybody is happy after the 1,335 days, because they're standing on Mount Zion along with Jesus Christ to receive their allotted reward. My dear brother, I hope this is understandable, because it's so important. This is the secret preaching that Daniel chapter 12 talks about. And in chapter 10, there's a secret. The seal has been broken, given to John. He's able to read it, but it is kept secret. He's told not to write anything. And then we get to, he said, you must prophesy again. And then verse 11, It's the same journey, the 1,260 days preaching. Verse 7, when they have finished their witnessing work, the beast comes up out of the abyss to conquer and kill them. 30-day setup period. It conquers and kills them in that devastated place with the disgusting thing that causes desolation. Then the dead in the street for 3.5 days. It all equals 1,335. I've got so much to show you. And if you need the intricate little proofs, I can prove it from God's word, all of it. What is important is not what we know or what we don't know, is that we inform our Christian brothers and sisters, because we've got to get out of Babylon the Great, because we're in that time now. Remember, verse 1 of chapter 12 starts it, a great sign was seen in heaven. Go onto YouTube, look at chapter 12 verse 1, or the sign in heaven, the woman gives birth, anything like that, and you'll see that the celestial signs in the heavens have happened, starting this 1,335 days. I'm going, my brother. I could carry on. I hope it makes sense. I'll send you a little note to say that I've uploaded it on my channel, Paul Simpson. I'm new to this. I ain't got a clue what I'm doing, but I hope it's a benefit. And someday I'm hoping to see you, because we've got so much to talk about. Anyway, thanks for now, and bye.